I grew up in a Christian home and a Christian family to two loving parents. I grew up in church, going to church camp and in Bible studies with Christian friends. My parents really loved the Lord, and they really taught us kids how to love the Lord from a young age. The person that was most fundamental in my upbringing, in my understanding of just God's grace, was my dad. He was just really passionate about God and a reader of the Word. He served in church and the local juvenile detention hall. He had a ministry. And so he was just always kind of the person that I was able to look to as a kid and see God's love through him. Mostly what I remember is before I would go into school, each morning my dad would park outside the school, and it'd just be me and him, and he'd lay his hand on me and pray over my day. At the time, I remember feeling kind of like awkward and embarrassed about it, but looking back, I'm really glad that he did that, because it really taught me to bring my cares before the Lord and to be a spiritual leader for my family. So in my formative years, I'm really glad that he did that. There was a kind of a turning point in my life. The year right before I went into high school, we packed up a U-Haul and we moved to Texas without any connections or any family members that lived there. Shortly after I started my freshman year, my parents said, "Hey, let's go for a drive." And we all got in the car and we went for a drive, and it wasn't like out of the ordinary for them to take us on a drive, but my mom said, "We got to tell you something. We went to the doctor, and your dad's really sick. He has stage 4 skin cancer, and they just wanted to be honest with us." She told us he has an 11% chance to live. And I remember I just remember being scared and confused. But also I felt hopeful that God could do a work of healing and a miracle, and that the odds were in our favor, and that he was going to heal my dad. My dad battled with cancer for the better part of a year, and he died in January of 2010 when I was 16 years old. It was really like life-shattering for every member of my family to lose my dad, because he was the one that encouraged us and kind of took us under his wing. And with no kind of support system when we were where we were living, just kind of lost our bearings, and I slipped into this kind of a state of apathy and feeling nothing really, which kind of propelled me into a depression. I just didn't have anyone to talk to, and so I kind of got in with the wrong crowd at school, and I started just doing whatever I could to kind of take my mind off of reality. And I started doing drugs, started smoking weed, and just kind of partying and living a kind of a like wild lifestyle. My grades started to slip. I just didn't really care about relationships or righteous pursuits or anything like that. And it just kind of started to get hazy. And I remember in particular, I was hanging out with some friends, and they said, "Aren't you religious? Isn't your family religious?" And I remember saying, I used to be a Christian, but I don't think I am anymore. And that's kind of the moment, the turning point, which I let go of my identity as a Christian and started living a life of pursuing self-interest. And I think when you do that and you turn your back on God, things just get darker and darker. Graduated high school by the skin of my teeth, And I decided it was best if I moved back to Oregon. And so I moved back on my own. Things just got worse from there. I just got into harder and harder drugs and just started hanging out with worse and worse people. I remember it kind of all came to a boiling point. One night I was invited to this party. I went out to this party, and it was in this like really rundown looking ramshackle house on the side of the highway. There's a bunch of really sketchy looking people there. And this girl came up to me, and she had this bag of white powder, and she said, "You want to do this?" And I thought, I have nothing to lose, sure. And so I did what, looking back, was probably way more than a user amount of whatever this was. I'm not even sure what it was. And I went downstairs, and it kind of kicked in, and I immediately felt like, oh no, what did I do? And I looked up, and I was looking for help. I wanted someone to reach out to, someone to confide in, and I realized that everybody in the place that I was in the same state that I was. They were wandering around, just kind of mumbling to themselves incoherently. I thought, man, this must be what hell is like. I got up and I went to the bathroom, and I shut the door and I locked it, and I fell down and I just had my head in the toilet, and for what felt like hours, I just sat on the bathroom floor and I just battled for my life. And I really feel like that night I was supposed to die, or not supposed to die. I feel like that night I was gonna die, and I could feel kind of consciousness fading, and I was going in and out, and I just reached out to the Lord and I said, God, help. It was just a really simple prayer. Like, if you're there, Lord, then help me. And he spoke to me. He said, Elijah. He said my name. It was just that one word. And it all came rushing back to me. And it was like remembering who I was. It was like hearing my identity just in the spoken word of my name. And then he said, if you keep living like this, you're gonna die. And then he answered my prayer and he helped me, and in a second it was like this perfect clarity and sobriety came over me, and it was indescribable. I felt like a joy and peace. I felt like crying. I was like overwhelmed with emotion, and I thought, I gotta get out of here. And I walked out the front door. On the way to the car, the group of friends that had invited me were sitting in this car, and they were like listening to music. And I went up to the window to tell them I was leaving, and they rolled down the window and they were listening to this song. And I said, it was like the mood in the car was like really somber, and they all looked really sad. I said, what are you listening to? One of the girls in the car said, my ex-boyfriend. And I said, well, like, what happened to him? Like, did he die or something? And I'll never forget this. She looked at me, and with this intensity, she said, no, he stopped hanging out with us, and now he's a Jesus freak. And hearing her say that was like, it gives me chills even now just thinking about it. I just had this realization, like, whoa, someone was in this lifestyle and they walked away from it, and now they love Jesus. And I thought, man, that's what I want to be. I want to be the guy that they remember, man, now he's a Jesus freak. And on the way home, I just burst into tears, and I was just crying, and I was just crying out to God. All these emotions that had been on pause for years, since I was 16, I was just feeling again, and it was like coming back to life. And I really think that I got saved that night. Then next day I went to church, and the worship was awesome, and Coming from a background of music, I went up and I went to introduce myself to the worship leader, and I shook his hand, and it turns out that was the same guy that they were listening to in the car that night. He was the Jesus freak, and that was just another way that the Lord revealed himself to me. Incredible realizing that there was still someone waiting for me on the other side, and that was the person of Jesus, and just the fact that he is not only our Savior, our Redeemer, but he's also our friend, and that he wants a relationship with me even after I was doing nothing for him and going my own way for years. It just makes me think that he never left and that he was there the whole time. I am now married. I have a beautiful wife. I have a 2-year-old son and one on the way. I think it's important to say that night God did rescue me out of a life of licentiousness and evil, but that night it wasn't the end of my brokenness and it wasn't the end of my sin, but it was the beginning of me stepping into reconciliation and the redemptive work that God has had planned for me. And every day that I choose to walk in that is God saying, hey, I'm going to heal you, I'm going to sanctify you, and one day you're going to come and be with me in heaven. I think the encouragement in my story is that no matter who you are or what you've done or where you may find yourself, God is waiting for you on the other side. God is still there. He's real. And Jesus cares about you, and he loves you. And you're still a son or a daughter, and he's just waiting to accept you back in with open arms. I'm Elijah Brune, and this is my story.